might create its own civilization by 2019. And I would like to start off by defining what exactly is civilization. Okay, great. The most boring definition of civilization. Geography, religion, arts and architecture, politics, government, economics, social structure, extremely boring. This is not my definition. I don't care about this. My definition is that language is the building blocks of our civilization. So a communication form we're taking right now is we're building these machines to execute our goals and purposes for us. And we need to reconsider the ways we communicate with machines, because how we communicate to machines determines, by 2019, how our identity is formed, and what roles we play in society, and the relationship we have with AIs. So we believe that by 2019, computational literacy will be on the rise. So just as how the rise of literacy gave us bureaucracy or any modern invention that we have right now, we wonder what's computational literacy among humans, and that the capability to communicate directly with machines will bring to our civilization, and whether or not that will give rise to an AI civilization.
So we talked about the significance of this question, like why did we choose this raise question, and in 1920, why would this question be relevant? So the future of society, like wondering, what it's going to be like, is kind of like innate for us humans. Does anyone know? Everyone knows these movies, right? The Matrix and I, Robot, and all these movies, they picture like a dystopian universe where machines take over. And even now, like that's always the question about AI. Like, will one day, instead of us controlling them, they'll control us? That's always the number one question, and I think that really comes from our lack of security of our position in society. Because right now, AI is already taking over our general tasks like automation and such. But now they're also starting to be used in creative process. But we are still the one that's having the tasks that are quote unquote meaningful. But if one day AI takes over that role, that means the value that we put in the ecosystem that we created, if it can be diminished to code, that's kind of a scary prospect. So I think that this is a question that everyone's sort of wondering. Next is, I think the base of this whole question is to first analyze the relationship between AI and humans. So this is kind of how the relationship is at modern day. So it's a two-way relationship. First is human assisting machine. So humans must train the machine. We must give them plenty and extensive data set for them to know, to design them how to work. And also, because of the black box nature of machine learning in general, we don't actually know what is happening. So experts have to be able to explain their behavior to non-experts, because the computers can't really explain themselves, or at least haven't gotten there yet. And we don't need to just create it, we also need to be able to sustain the system to make sure that they continually work. But machines also assist humans. I honestly can't imagine a future where we won't have AI in whatever sort of form, because they amplify our cognitive strengths. They help with our decision making, because they can look at all the computational possibilities in a much faster rate than we can. They can enable more interaction in more interactive ways. I think now we know about chat boxes and intelligence could be embodied in a form that resembles humans. So it's not just digital entities or a computer, or now it's we actually have robots, and I think it's becoming closer and closer to us, which can be scary. So the question is, can society exist without this codependency? So for machines to be independent, it would need self-awareness, and I think that's also a really big question. Can the machine one day be self-aware? But I think this raises a huge philosophical question, what it would mean to be self-aware. Well, Alan Turing defines it as the ability to be subject of its own mind, and if we use that definition, then yes, chip machines can be aware. They can think for themselves. They can think. However, a lot of people have different definitions, subjective awareness, the ability to feel pain, the ability to have their own goals and do things to seek rewards outside of human pleasures. And this is still a question that hasn't been answered, and a lot of people are very skeptical about it. But I think the first step of self-awareness that is more within our rear view is unpredictability. And the fields that are currently in the forefront and prove that machines can be very much unpredictable is first parallelization. So when you run so many things on any professor, they start behaving in a non-deterministic way, one that we cannot predict. And machine learning, I think this is, everyone should be quite familiar that you put like a lot of training data, but sometimes it still offers things that we could not imagine. And this field of neuromorphic, where there are now projects that modify the computer architecture to be more like the brain, which result in further loss of control of what's going on inside. So this increases unpredictability, and this is somewhat a step closer to self-awareness.
So how would it look like? So for an AI civilization, I think the first step is to be self-aware and self-governing. And because for humans, we are to an extent self-aware and self-governing, or else we wouldn't be able to do the things we do or think the way we think, have free thought. And also, like, if AI were to be one day more developed to the point where they can control themselves, then would they actually ever need human beings to tell them what to do or what to think? That could be less efficient for them. And going on efficiency. So how would an AI-run civilization actually look like? Would it actually be in a physical realm like we have to do as three-dimensional being? Or would it be based on a network of servers rather than what we think as human beings to be possible? So for us, maybe like a small room, like maybe the size of this room, would be very small. But to AI, it could be like as big as like America or something. And the third question, would it even happen? Would AI have the desire and motivation to even mimic what a human being would do? So human beings, they band together because there's strength in numbers, and then we for once are like, from hunter-gatherer times, we tend to band together to protect ourselves from external threats. But does AI have the same external threats that we experience in nature? So would they actually see strength in numbers, or would they see themselves as needing just electricity and computational power to grow? So I think these are the three questions that are very important to ask.
So next question would be, could it exist without humans? So from our understanding about the current technology and how can AI do in the future, our answer is possibility no. The reason are three. First one is because AI is still a technical creation, so they still need some technical help. Like from time to time, they need to there might some technical issues, and also they need to have some regular maintenance or inspections from time to time in order to run normally. And so at that point, they still need humans to help on fixing their technical issues. And for the next one is about the development of AI, because AI creates by humans. So it's humans decide how smart they are, how much work they can do. And if we want that AI to improve, then it still needs our humans to develop their level. And for the last one is they still need humans' emotional support. So civilization is not only about the numbers, the data, it's also about the culture. And for the culture, they need feelings. For now, like one of the, like what Sebastian mentioned, self-awareness is an important thing about the AI now. But if in the future, AI still without any feelings, you can only do like work based on the rules, then how can it create a really great civilization without any culture? Then that's why we think it also needs humans' emotional support.
Amy, go ahead.
So I think, really like the presentation. I think in Turing's paper, because you talked about AI not being able to feel the way humans do, or understand feelings the way we do. But in Turing's paper, he was talking about how machines will be able to think in the future. But he totally avoided the question of, well, what exactly is thinking? And he said that a machine's thought will be indistinguishable from a human's thought, right? And so I think in a similar way, would it not be possible that even if an artificial intelligence doesn't think the way we do, as long as its thoughts or its sort of actions on those thoughts are indistinguishable from a human's thoughts, it doesn't really matter whether or not it does or does not rationalize things the way we do, right? And so I guess my question, in a sense that we don't, I mean, the thing is, the question isn't how do we know whether they can feel or not. It's that, I mean, and that question is irrelevant, just as Turing said that. Whether they think or not is irrelevant, as long as their thoughts are indistinguishable from a human's, right? So similarly here, whether they feel or not, or how they feel, or whatever they feel, is irrelevant. It's more that the way it presents it to us is indistinguishable from you presenting your feelings to me, for example, right? And there's already been strides made in that kind of area with the Google Lambda and things like that, where machine learning doesn't really understand what it's saying, but it's still able to communicate coherent thoughts and communicate metaphors and communicate feelings and understand all of this. And so yeah, like, I think is that a valid reason for AI not? I mean, is this a valid reason for AI not to be able to create its own civilization, right? Because we ourselves also don't understand how we feel.
I think that in terms of feelings, the reason why it was so important is because we are human beings. So like you said, like the fact that feelings, whether or not it actually has these feelings, whether or not it's actually self-autonomous or self-governing, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as it can process logic, in my opinion. So if an AI has different sets of values, obviously we can't expect to impose our own values onto AI, or like expect them to reflect humanity. So yeah, I think in a way that I agree with you that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
If I may rephrase his question, and if I may rephrase what you guys said, I mean, like Turing, I mean, of course, the beauty of that question was, I agree, that by asking the question, can machines think, we start really thinking about what it means to think. And because it's such a philosophical question without answer, we sort of have a proxy of can machines imitate. And so the parallel, I guess, when you started asking the question of civilization, I think the answer that you put in the slide was self-awareness and self-governance. So can we make the machine aware of its own existence, at least make us believe that it is? And can we make them self-govern?
Human beings use language to communicate.
All right.
So
That's the language.
As long as we program AI to respond in a way that seems natural to us, how a human would speak, I think then it will be easy enough for them to imitate us, and also for us to kind of accept generally. That they have
So we
self-governance.
go back to this imitation message that if the machine can imitate self-awareness and if the machine can imitate self-governing, we determine that they are self-aware and self-governing and capable of communicating with language.
So the only way we can right now quantify, like rationalize how like they're understanding us is to be able to respond to us for now, or execute a certain task.
And can you explain a little bit why you came to these two as the most significant feature of this civilization?
Because I think self-awareness and self-governance is, well, I took a model from human beings, obviously because I am a human being. So being self-aware means that you're responsible for your own actions, and that when you try and build something, you build something in the fact that you realize that other people similar to you or in your own close connections require that. So if you were to not be self-aware, you wouldn't know why you were doing something or why you had to do something. But since we as human beings realize that, oh, we need to get more advanced, or we can use coal, or we can use oil, fire to cook things for us to better ourselves together, and with that we are stronger as a species if we do these things. That's why we've done these things. we've done actions to get closer to where we are right now. And I think for self-governance, like if you need someone to always tell you what to do, like in a top-down structure, there always has to be someone at the top, or at least a few people at the top, to give instructions to people down below. But then that's kind of contrary to what I said, because I think you need to be self-governing to a certain extent. So you need to be able to realize that, oh, okay, I need to like put myself together to like follow these sets of instructions, and I'm kind of doing that out of my own book.
I think the way I personally interpret self-aware is through like motivation and like goals, like because humans kind of work on a reward system basis. We do things because we get something in return, like we get pleasure from doing a lot of these things to go up. And I'm kind of skeptical that like machines can ever really do that without humans, of course. That's why we know that maybe it is possible for machine civilization, but not without humans, because aren't we like programming like rewards? They won't actually feel like pleasure in things. So I think like the reward system is very much different from humans. So I think it can exist, but it'll just be a very different type of civilization. And I don't think it can exist without humans personally.
Yeah, another key phrase you use is desire.
Yeah.
And motivation. So, desire. Okay.
So our presentation is going to be on the question, can AI predict, which we came up with. And our group is Lulu, Miyu, Lisa, myself, and Shane.
So when measuring quality of life, we look at economic indicators, right? So now the whole field of economics is constructed by humans, right? To be able to accurately explain what is happening around us in our daily lives. However, one of the first lessons of economics is that you have to take every concept ceteris paribus, which is everything else remains equal, and all other things are equal. And the assumption is that everything else is the same, and this one variable is changing. And so when we look at demand and supply, for example, we look at a few mitigating factors that might affect demand and supply, but in general, we still have the assumption of ceteris paribus. And this assumption makes it easy for us to generalize, right? And through these generalizations, we come up with proxy variables to understand why humans work the way they do. And so this is also reflected in the way we structure machine learning or AI models today. For example, to understand a country's standard of living, we can take a look at a host of proxy variables, GDP per capita, HDI, name it, there's a bunch of things, right? However, these concepts are very frequently under the assumption of ceteris paribus. Since they're economic concepts, or they might be other concepts, but they're under the notion of, well, all other things are equal. And to allow them to be generalizable, right? And as a result, they do not accurately represent what we are actually trying to measure in the first place. And so current AI suffers from the same problem. It aims to be generalizable. And this is fine to predict patterns in the short term, but predicting the future, or like a bit more longer term, is a much more complicated endeavor. And the biggest current roadblock, I feel like, is just human beings ourselves and the way we are. We are too unpredictable, right? There's too much randomness in our thoughts, and our actions aren't based on rationality. They're based on our experiences, they're based on our emotions, they're based on 10,000 other factors, right? And social pressures and stuff that we aren't even aware of. And so that brings us to this book on the right over here, written by Malcolm Gladwell. If you look back at human history, the events that allowed humankind to sort of make huge strides forward weren't born out of what humans do generally, weren't born out of generalizations, they were born out of they were outliers, right? So to take COVID, you take the 2008 financial crisis, you take the Cold War, you take 9/11, you take World War II, Second War. Yeah. You take any of those, right? And so for example, without the Cold War, we wouldn't have any of the computing technology we have today. Without the First and Second World War, we wouldn't have any of the communications technology we have today. Without COVID, well, just having this hybrid class and classes wouldn't be possible, right? And this transition to hybrid classes wouldn't be possible, and whatever else is to come. And without 9/11, we would feel as safe on airplanes or just transport-wise. And so then why are our current efforts focused on being able to generalize when they should be focused on being able to predict outliers? And so to be able to predict the future, we believe that there's a huge sort of restructuring needed in the way we construct machine learning algorithms and the way we construct artificial intelligence algorithms. Because currently the first step, as a machine learning engineer myself, the first step we do with data sets is we take out the outliers. Right? We want our model to have a nice, p value and a nice, straight line kind of a thing. But if you want to be able to predict the future, we need to be able to predict the outliers, not what human beings do generally, because those are the outliers are the ones that actually push us forward and actually define what human society will do in the future. Yeah.
And next one. So how probabilistic computing help us predict a more accurate future? So there's three elements. And the first one is optimistic prediction. So I'm so sorry I can't bring the data today, but what I saw, I will explain what I saw. And this is the graph of the economy right now so far. And in the deep learning, they said after this point, COVID came. So of course, after the COVID, it went down. In deep learning, it just went down, and it didn't recover. But using probabilistic computing, it went down, but it recovered. So they can think about the future in an optimistic way. They can think about, because nobody thinks the economy is never gonna recover, right? Who thinks that way? That's because it's data driven. But in the data so far, it's going down. So the deep learning can only predict the future that's going down, and it's never going to recover. But probabilistic computing goes above. And for the second one, synthetic data. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with synthetic data, but when we do the learning for machine learning, we need data, and that doesn't change with probabilistic computing and the previous AI. But we don't have a clean data because, for example, medical data, most of them are covered because some things are not really good for the company or I don't know, somewhere. So they are mostly hidden. The bad data are hidden. But using synthetic data, they can just cover all the privacy. They cannot reverse the original data to those synthetic data and reverse it. And that's why we can make synthetic data to show every kinds of data. For example, bad thing happens, we can just cover it by using probabilistic computing. There's no individuals inside that data. And the intuitive reasoning. So in probabilistic computing, ProbCom can describe what they know and what they don't know. And they can explain why they don't know and why they know. So in the deep learning, how we got the result was completely black box. But in probabilistic computing, they can show how they got the result. So in that case, if something is getting wrong in the process, human can find it out and say, oh, this way of predicting is maybe it's not right. So we can just change that point and make it more accurate.
Okay, so to kind of wrap up her part, I would be talking about future prediction might be possible in the future. So as Shaimin said, AI up to now is actually possible to predict the future to some extent, but it requires a lot of learning, an enormous precedence, and also in addition to that, external factors that influence the results. For example, with COVID, yeah. So and there's and actually there is some dangerous points if we utilize probabilistic computing. And one is trade-off relations between transparency and accuracy. As Blue said, probabilistic computing can do optimistic predictions, but there is a possibility that humans actually cannot understand how they reach that result, even if they try to explain it to us. So simply, it's just AI's intelligence just exceeds human beings' intelligence. So it would be kind of scary, and it's going to be like a sci-fi movie. And so if you try to uplift transparency, the accuracy would go down, but the accuracy goes up with the transparency of how AI reached that result would be in a black box. So it's it's a trade-off relations. So we need to care about that. Next slide, please.
Okay, next I want to talk about is an anime show called The Orbital Children, or Kenkyukai Shounen Shoujo. Has anyone watched this? Sensei, have you seen it before? It's a brilliant show, and the reason why I wanted to talk about this Netflix show is because our entire point kind of originated from this show as a source reference, in the sense that this story talks about AI and our relationship to an AI program that has gone lunatic. And that means that it has gone so far in intelligence and it has exceeded the black box point so far that it's actually self-destructive. And in this story, this AI self-destructs and releases a code. And this code is this one, you can see kind of here. It's sort of like that, and it's called the 7 poem. 7 because the AI itself in the story was named 7. And so once people decoded the message, they found out that the poem itself was a prediction of the future. And the AI had managed to predict humanity's future and put it into a poem form. And this movie goes on to explain. I won't explain the entire story, you guys can go watch it for yourself. But I wanted to point this out because our entire presentation that we've talked about so far points in the direction of this anime. And we wanted to show you something that is culturally relevant, that you can see what would happen, theoretically what would happen if probabilistic computing and AI in and of itself could solve problems heuristically and intuitively. And once it does that, then there's a possibility that we would create an AI program that far succeeds our own, just like Lisa talked about. That we can't control per se, but will in turn control us. Which is a very scary prospect, but it might very much be possible. And so although for now, just like Shaggy said, predicting the future in the sense that we talked about in the anime is impossible for now, we still don't know the possibilities yet, especially with the rate of progression of technology that we're seeing right now. And just like Mia pointed out, Turing's paper, he pointed out the fact that in decades from now, that the technology that he's talking about and he's mentioning in the paper will be so ubiquitous to us that it's irrelevant to talk about. And I think that proves as to why we chose the question, can AI predict? We thought of going with can AI feel, but 70 years from now, we believe that 7 might very much be possible, and we might have something like a 7 poem that dictates our life.
You use the word intuition.
Yep.
Would that be? Is that what this is about?
In some senses, I think in intuition, you can use as a word to describe the most important part that we want an AI to do is to connect point A to point Z or something.
So really the question we want to be asking is with probabilistic computing, can we have the machines to have the intuition capability? Is that the right way to phrase this?
Yeah, in some senses. And so prediction, it doesn't mean, we mean in every sense of the word, so large future predictions, and being able to predict something that happens like, 10 seconds from now.
Is there an assumption that when you are exercising intuition, we are humans that doing probabilistic thinking?
In some senses, I think, but I think that it's a lot more complex in our minds that we still haven't even been able to figure out, because if we were able to, we'd just put it onto AI, I think.
Okay.
So our topic is, what does it mean to be a person and relevance to AI in the future? Right, so what is going to be the role of AI in the future and 70 years from now? So it really depends on the industry and the areas and distinct roles, because to different industry it has different extent of capability of the AI. And so for example, in medical and cybersecurity and transportation, medical researchers and doctors uses the patient's data and then combining with technology and AI to create treatment that works best for individual. For cybersecurity, to employ people's data to detect, to predict, and to respond to threats and dangers immediately. And transportation, autonomous driving, which is what Tesla has been doing. And with the way how the future holds AI, ideally it's going to be a ubiquitous thing. where everyone driving is going to be assisted with AI, and then
So we're gonna be a bit more philosophical, I guess. So, I'm gonna switch the focus towards American contemporary scientist William Lincoln and his robots and minds. So in Robots and Minds, he proposes Harry. And Harry is your average Joe. He goes to work, he shows ambition and feelings. His skin feels like skin, and his hair feels like hair. You consider him as like a close friend. There's nothing about him that makes you suspicious of him of being not human. Until one day he gets a cut, and instead of blood, motor oil falls out, essentially. And you realize he's not human like us, he's a robot. Is Harry no longer a person to you? Lycan says that this shouldn't degrade our view of our friend from being a person to being person-like. To him, he's still your friend Harry, a person. So what does Harry lack to be considered a person? Is the existence of blood, not having blood, is that all it is to be human, to be a person? Some may argue that Harry was programmed by someone else, programmed to act a certain way. So what? Aren't us humans also genetically coded by our family's DNA? Aren't we all programmed through our environment this instant? Harry is as well. He was programmed to exist, and through very strong AI, he changes with his environment like you and me. Lycan uses Harry to defend functionalism. So as long as he functions to have a consciousness, Lycan, like Turing, claims he is conscious like you and me. What Harry is composed of shouldn't concern how much of a person Harry is. So I want to move this shift from consciousness and focus on a bit on sentience. So some say sentience is what qualifies for personhood, the capacity to genuinely sense and feel, to experience sensations and feelings. So Harry appears to, genuinely sense and feel, but it may just be for show. Like, if anything, he also may be even a better friend that can relate to us deeper and show even more emotions, but is he actually feeling those emotions? He looks happy, but, is he actually feeling happy? Is the question we want to ask. That's all, Rez.
So I just have a question in regards to, so you're basically approaching like a philosophical or theological idea of what is a soul, or like what is a person inside a human body, right? And what makes that a person, right?
That's actually an argument against that Harry isn't a person, because humans have souls, Harry doesn't.
I think that's very arbitrary and hard to define.
Yeah, obviously it's because it's religious as well. So, but if we just pretend that there is a God,
Right.
and the God gives us the soul or the embryo or whatever,
Right.
there's nothing to say that he can't give Harry a soul either.
Right, like Turing said.
Right.
Okay, I'm afraid the time is up, but this was so let me just give you a brief comment of there has been actually a debate as to whether our research should be about artificial intelligence or machine intelligence. The research on artificial intelligence have been really, I think you now realize the researcher of artificial intelligence have been really thinking about actually what human beings are. Personality, intuition, thinking, what it is to think, and that sort of thing. There are also another school of thought that sort of detaches that intelligence from human being. And these people tend to think of machine intelligence. So there's a slight difference in the emphasis of the research. But I think this message is much more clear now that you have thought about these things. But I congratulate you. I love it. Okay. That's it.